before I bring up Jack is finest unfiltered family here. What's interesting about Jack is not a police officer. He's a young man who's had an experience with media and radio. He's a team member of the finest unfiltered family. Does a lot of our production, a lot of great stuff. Great job yesterday producing Sal's show. We had some technical difficulties, and it was Jack really behind the scenes that did a great job of pulling off that show. So Jack and I were having a conversation the other day, and I thought this is a great segment. So some of our friends and listeners, don't go anywhere yet. I'd like you to weigh in on this. And we had a conversation about civil service exams. We're talking about police officers. How do we attract the most suitable police officers? And the question was, are civil service exams something that attracts the qualified police officers, or is it something that we're not getting potentially police officers we should get because of those exams? So hearing also from Jack and why a young man might want to be a cop now or might not want to be a cop is a great conversation. So the question is this, and we're going to get into the segment, Marlon. The question is this: should we continue to have civil service exams to have entry-level police officers? So let's bring up Jack and let's get into this conversation. Jack, how you doing, brother? I'm glad you're here. Thanks for helping out. Great job with the show yesterday. Jack really pulled it off. So, Jack, before we get into that, I just want to say this: civil service exams have been around for a long time, right? If you're going to be a New York City police officer, you have to take this test to get yourself on a list to eventually get potentially called for a background investigation hiring process, which I think correlates to what we're talking about with these psychological unqualified or qualified licensed professionals to determine if you should be that police officer. So, Jack, what are your thoughts, if you could tell the chat, and want them to weigh in on a civil service exam and why you think it should be or not be implemented as part of the hiring process?
Well, yeah, good to join you guys for a change. Generally speaking, I'm only on with the Sal Greco show, so it's nice to be on New York's finest retired and unfiltered podcast in the morning for a change at 10:22 Eastern time here in beautiful sunny South Florida. But in regards to civil service exams, I don't see the point in having people take an exam when it doesn't measure their capability for doing an actual job. If you want to be a police officer and you're going to be apprehending people with guns, those that are very dangerous, even if you're going to be dancing with people in the Community Affairs Bureau, a civil service exam does absolutely nothing to measure your ability to do that job. As a matter of fact, it may be weeding out people who are competent for the job, because a lot of police officers were not exactly fantastic students in school, and as such, you can logically believe they were not great test takers either. So this idea that we're going to give out an exam that we're going to charge everyone $60 for, and by the way, this is applicable to every single agency in New York City. It's not just the police department, it's the fire department, sanitation, corrections, every single department. We're going to make people pay $60, many of whom are from low-income backgrounds, to take an exam that does not sufficiently determine whether they can do a job. And then their score on it is going to dictate whether or not they're allowed in. That seems like a very unfair barrier to entry, and one that is not going to be getting the most qualified people.
Fantastic points there, Jack. But I'm going to agree with you on this. You know, it's these civil servant exams don't necessarily make a, you know, we see it even on the job. You know, guys take the test and they go up to be, you know, their chief, but the chief is like a, you know, he was a terrible cop as a chief. He was a terrible cop when he was in the precinct, and now he's chief. But he can be chief now. He has 26 collars, 22 collars in the precinct. Okay. In 5-6 years, but now he's chief, and he's a leader of hundreds of men, you know. So I agree with you 100%, especially when it comes now. Don't get me wrong, I do think we need some sort of metric to determine who's going to become a supervisor and whatnot. But certainly to get in the door, I agree with you 100% that the civil service civil servant exams don't do the job justice. I think the job would be better off with some sort of interview process where individual candidates, you fill out the paperwork, let them know your background, and you come and you have a sit down interview and let them know who you are and why you're good at this job, just like you would, if you went for a corporate job somewhere, I think that might be a better metric of certainly to get in the door. Now we have other metrics once you get into the academy, and you got to prove that you're worthy. You got to this door, but you got to prove that you're going to you're what we're looking for before we give you a badge and a gun and send you out to the precinct. But certainly to get into the door, I agree with you.
And also, I'll piggyback off that point, Eric. It looked like you froze for a minute, so I'll throw it to you in a second. But once you're on the job, there's literally no incentive to actually do any work because of the civil service exams. Because, like, if you want to get promoted, you hear everyone talking about, oh, I had a boss I didn't like, so I'm going to go study harder for an hour more after work tomorrow. So you don't have to conduct any arrests. You don't really have to show up and do anything. You can request an administrative post where you're doing a job that a police officer shouldn't even be doing, and yet you can still get promoted. Like, it's a system that doesn't reward hard work, and it unfairly so puts everyone on the same playing field. Marlon, you could go out, you can conduct 50 arrests, you could snag 30 guns off the street, you could get some of the most high-profile criminals in all of New York City, and it'll mean absolutely nothing when it comes to getting promoted. Someone who arrested one person off a 911 call 3 years ago could get promoted ahead of you. That doesn't make any sense. And now people are going to argue because of cronyism and nepotism in the NYPD, that would totally offset everything if this was all done by a discretionary process. I get that, but my solution would also involve an independent agency that makes a lot of these types of rules and oversees the police department. We need more federal oversight of the NYPD because it hasn't had enough guardrails, and it's tried to internally police itself. Wrongfully so. They have a legal team now, which does absolutely nothing. And the legal team, I would compare to a very glorified human resources department that makes sure a company doesn't get sued or that they're not in any legal trouble. So it's become a very powerful organization with all these systemic processes in place that are hurting the agency. And more importantly, they're hurting the public, because when you have lieutenant special assignments driving around people as chauffeurs making $300,000 a year, all of a sudden you have less resources. You don't have the ability to put cops down in the subway. And you look at it right now as well. Cops in New York City starting off are making $46,000 a year, roughly $50,000 a year after they graduate the academy, and $61,000 after a year. And the pay scale, by the way, I couldn't find it on the NYPD's website, but it goes up, as I understand it, very gradually until you get to the 5-10 year mark. So you're not even making enough money to move out of mommy and daddy's house for 5 years if you're taking this job. And also, the police department is going to be stocking the workforce with young, inexperienced officers because they're not going to be able to pay for all of the experienced guys as well. So they're kind of weakening the payroll a little bit by getting people who are less experienced on the job. That's another factor that no one's talking about.
So I always say opposition meets opportunity, and I think we have to have two separate conversations, my opinion. So what you said so far is that we need an interview process as entry-level police officers to determine if someone is suitable to be a police officer. So my opinion, I kind of make the comparison. If you join the military, you take what's called an ASVAB, right? It's basically an aptitude test to see what your qualifications are, to see what jobs you would be suited for in the military. So obviously the police department's a little different, right? You have to be suited to be a cop. I think that the civil service exam for entry level is necessary to make sure that you have just basic aptitude, reading comprehension, your math, and to get to the interview process. There is an interview process. That is the background check. That is the psychological, that if it's done properly to assess your character and also your physical fitness. To me, that is the interview process that really circumvents and eliminates potential nepotism, cronyism. Now, when it comes to promotion, I think that's the second conversation. where I agree and disagree. I do like the civil service exam for promotion because it alleviates the discretionary process of potential cronyism and nepotism and puts you on a list that no matter what, if someone doesn't like you or you're not in the circle, you can still get promoted. However, I don't think it should be the only aspect for that reason, because if Marlon or myself is out there doing intrusive police work, we're making arrests, we're doing what's necessary to be a cop, and we're also highly regarded and respected by our peers, we should pass that test to move on to become sergeants in the police department. But unfortunately, if there's someone else that was kind of an empty suit and didn't do the job to that to the maximum in that aspect, they could potentially get promoted even before. And in many cases, especially now, if you're doing intrusive police work, and many of my active police officers that used to work for me, they're sergeants right now, they're out there doing intrusive police work and they're being good cops. Well, complaints do correspond. They're going to get a lot of complaints, and complaints can hinder you from getting promoted in your career, just as it did mine. I was halted from making captain because of civilian complaints. So in some cases, it's almost a better move to not do anything. And now the guy who's doing nothing has a better opportunity to move up. So I do think the test is important, but there should be other aspects with that test. Should also be a physical fitness test, and also should be some type of leadership course that you have to take to become a leader. There's no leadership apparatus and there's no leadership training in the NYPD. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so the concept of civil service, I kind of have gone over this briefly on and off the air. The concept of civil service was created in 500 to 600 CE, the Middle Ages in China, because it was a privilege to go and work for the emperor. So you had to take an exam. The exam was originally designed to eliminate nepotism. I've seen a lot of people in the comments talking about how the exam is a good thing. Ron Layson chimes in here saying the interviews are too subjective and they removed the interview portion of promotional exams for that very reason. Listen, guys, I think you all make very valid points, but at the end of the day, the civil service exam is still a bad system. And for some reason, all the other police departments, the sheriff's offices throughout the country that don't do civil service exams are having a ton of success. And not only that, they're poaching people from the NYPD, candidates that were thinking about joining the department, and bringing them to their department. So they must have a system in place that somehow, some way works. Part of the problem, too, is people in New York City are too institutionally brainwashed to change their way of doing things. When you talk to people who are working in civil service positions, they're so set on having these exams that they can't even think of an alternative. Devising an alternative is extremely tough. I'm not going to sit here and pretend it doesn't. You might need to offer an exam to determine basic competency, reading comprehension, mathematical abilities, all skills that are necessary for being a police officer for one reason or another, right? But at the end of the day, you can't be having an exam that makes or breaks their ability to get on the job when there's so many different components and elements to it. That's kind of the crux of my point.
Well, and also to that point, I've seen people in the academies who like, you wonder how they pass the civil servant exams, So even with the civil servant exam, I don't think it's you're getting the best quality recruits into the door. So I'm of the opinion that one of the problems with the NYPD is that we're so big, we're too big for our own good. And that if you had a smaller department, you'd be able to, it'd be harder for these cracks to in the system to go on unobserved. I think because we're so big, it's easier for things to get lost in the system, and it's harder for like say 1PP to keep track of a lot of these things, or parts of 1PP to keep track of it, Like, do we think Tish knows everything that's going on in a department of 30,000 people? 30,000, supposedly 30,000, though we think it's a little bit under that. But it's more than 30,000 when you include the civilians. Do we think Tish knows all of that? No. I think we're too big for our own good. And one of the things that would help in that case would be a smaller department. And in that case, we can do these interviews and on on a more intimate basis, and kind of more sift through the applicants that we're getting before we get them into the academy. And one of the unfortunately for us and for a lot of big blue cities is that we're now acting as a kind of like a minor league team for these sheriff's departments, now, which to their credit, it kind of helps them in the recruitment process, because you're already getting that's less effort for you to have to go through their record if they're already been a cop in New York or these blue cities. So,
well, great comment here from Crazy 10-7. So I'm going to put up on the screen real quick here. The civil service promotional exams have nothing to do with supervision or leadership. You're absolutely right. Spot on. That is the missing link. That's the major gaping hole in the NYPD. Rate memorization of an inapplicable rule book does nothing to select leaders or even supervise. You're right. So while I agree, I also disagree with. I would not get rid of the civil service exam for promotions. I think it should be part of a segment, I guess you could say, or maybe there's a 5-point scoring list. Maybe one of those points is the test. One would be the physical fitness test. One would be a leadership course. One would be maybe an actual interview, and one could be actual assessment on your career, where we look at your jacket. But what I do think is necessary about the civil service exam is that it does negate the potential for cronyism and nepotism. Look at the cronyism and nepotism we have now with discretionary promotions. What would that look like if we didn't have a civil service exam and we were just appointing people to sergeant and lieutenant? It would be far more out of whack than it is now. And that could be scary. Now we're talking about not just the leadership at the top, we're talking about the frontline leadership, and everything could be distorted.
You've just watched a clip from our live episode. Click the description to watch the full episode. Like, share, and subscribe for more videos just like this.